Hello, BookTube. I wanted to make a quick announcement video just to let you know that a very happy turn of events has happened. The Bookish Bryants, I'll leave a link to their channel. You will probably know them already. They are masters of creating BookTube events. Some people are really good at tags. Some people are really good at hating Steve. Some people are really good at creating events. And they create great BookTube events. And they've been, to put it mildly, a little bit preoccupied in the last month or month and a half. And as a result, they were going to give a miss to one of their annual book events, one of the events that they inaugurated last year, February Fantasy Stories, FFS. And I voxered them and asked if I could continue the event without them. And they surprised me by saying yes, which is wonderful. That means we don't have to go a year without FFS. Who knows if whether or not next year the circumstances around their booktubing might be more convenient for them joining in. So I wanted to announce that if you are up for reading fantasy stories, I myself am very much going to do FFS for February. And I have rough prompts. As is true with anybody who makes a booktube event, you don't have to follow the prompts. If you read a work of fantasy in February, you are definitely part of it. If you're going to read fantasy anyway in February, I would love to hear what it is that you're going to read or reread. That would be great. But I came up with 4 prompts just in case you like that. Prompt number 1 being sword and sorcery, which is a subcategory of fantasy in which a lone person or a small group of people use usually physical force to combat a localized sorceress menace. Sword and sorcery stories usually aren't saving the world from the Dark Lord. They usually don't involve wizards on the side of good. They're usually, think of Conan, and you won't go wrong. So week 1 is sword and sorcery. A short story, a novella, a novel, whatever you like. Then week 2 is epic. And here, I am thinking of gigantic fantasy stories, but I realize that's a lot of a request to make of people who have busy lives and lots of other booktube events to be part of. And it occurs to me that you can have epic fantasy in a short form, too. I mean, you don't have to have 800 pages for it to be epic fantasy. In order to be epic fantasy, it just has to be sweeping. There has to be many continents involved, many types of people, many races involved. It has to be some sort of all-encompassing villainy involved. It can't be, a wizard in Chandrazar who wants to control the docks. It has to be a Dark Lord in Mordor who wants to banish all hope. That sort of thing. So epic for week 2. Then week 3, I thought installment. So is there a multi-chapter multi-installment fantasy story that you've been working on or that you've been meaning to get to? Something like that. Week 3 would be the one when you might want to think about pulling that down off the shelf. Is there a fantasy series that you're stalled in or something like that? Here I'm not, in most of my prompts, I'm not so much worrying about the length of the work. The original conception of February fantasy stories was shorter works, and I'd like to preserve that, but fantasy tends not to be written, first of all, at shorter length, but stories will work just fine. Installments will work just fine for stories. And then week number 4, if you want, any fantasy that you read is fine by me. But week number 4 would be contemporary. And that is, it can be urban fantasy, but also just the ordinary normal world, but with fantasy in it, with elements of fantasy in it, which is, I think, a little rarer out there in the publishing world, but it does still happen, and it has happened in the past. So those are 4 rough categories if you want, rough prompts if you want to use them for February fantasy stories. So the Bookish Bryants February fantasy stories is continuing in 2023. It's just that I'll be doing the honors, and then we'll hope for their return next year. So if you feel like joining me, feel free to sing out in the comments field. Let me know what you plan on reading. Make a video if you have a BookTube channel. Let me know what you think about any of these types of fantasy and what you might read in fantasy. And I'll be making a TBR of my own this week before February kicks off explicitly. I just wanted to give an announcement now. So there you go. February Fantasy Stories is not actually dead. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.